"Get out of here, you're not my son," Father shouted, pointing at the door, his eyes bloodshot, as if I were a stranger trespassing in this house. I stood there, my heart pounding, my offer to help, the last bridge to mend things, mercilessly crushed by him. Mother sat in her chair, hands covering her face, sobbing uncontrollably but saying nothing. Luke, my younger brother, turned away, his gaze as cold as ice. I wanted to scream, to ask them why, after everything I'd done, they still saw me as a failure. But I stayed silent, walked to the door, and the heavy thud of the wooden door slamming behind me felt like the final punctuation mark on a family bond that had long been fractured. I am Adrian Carter, 37 years old. 5 years ago, I poured my heart and all my savings into building a restaurant called Adrian's Bistro. A dream I'd nurtured since my college days, fantasizing about a place where people would gather, laugh, and savor unique dishes crafted by my own hands. But at the time, my family saw that dream as a fanciful whim, like a candle flickering in the wind, liable to go out at any moment. I grew up in a well-off family in a large suburban house where the walls were adorned with paintings and the bookshelves groaned under the weight of classic novels. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Carter, were the epitome of stability. Father, a retired accountant, always took pride in the balanced figures in the family ledger. Mother, a literature teacher, loved Shelley's poetry and often spoke of her youthful dreams of becoming a writer, though she chose the safer path. They had a spacious house, a few savings accounts, and a steadfast belief that a good life was a risk-free one. I loved them, but sometimes that love felt heavy, like a shadow I couldn't step out from. Then there was Luke, my brother, 5 years younger, whom the family called the Pride. Luke was the sales director of a major corporation, going to work in crisp suits, driving a sleek BMW, and always regaling us with stories of million-dollar deals. He was smart, charismatic, and had a knack for earning people's trust. My parents looked at Luke as if he were a beacon, proof that they'd done everything right. I wasn't jealous, honestly. I just wished sometimes that they'd look at me with the same eyes. My restaurant sat on a bustling street corner with a wooden sign bearing its name and small windows framed with red curtains. I opened it 2 years ago, using up all my savings and taking out a hefty loan. I wanted to create a warm place where diners wouldn't just eat but feel the passion I poured into every dish. But reality was harsher than I'd imagined. Customers came sparingly, bills piled up, and every night I sat alone in my tiny office, staring at the negative numbers on the balance sheet, wondering if I'd been wrong to choose this path. My family knew. They didn't say it outright, but I could see it in Mother's eyes when she stopped by, glancing at the empty tables and sighing. Father was more direct. "Adrian, you should find a stable job," he said, his voice flat like he was reading a financial report. "A restaurant is a gamble and you're not a card player." I smiled, nodded, but inside something shattered. I didn't want them to worry, but I also didn't want to give up. The restaurant wasn't just a job, it was me. The sleepless nights crafting menus, the joy of seeing a customer smile because of a dish I'd made. Luke was different. He didn't criticize, but he didn't support me either. Once when I invited him to eat at the restaurant, he looked around, raised an eyebrow, and said, "This place, it's cozy, but how are you going to manage with all that debt?" I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Luke didn't understand, and I didn't blame him. He lived in a world of big numbers and secure contracts, while I lived on hope and fragile dreams. The tension became more apparent that Christmas afternoon. My parents called me to the house, saying there was something important to discuss. I went, bringing a bottle of wine from the restaurant, hoping to lighten the mood. The house was the same as ever. The smell of polished wood, the warm glow of yellow lights, and the family portrait above the fireplace where Luke and I, as kids, smiled brightly beside our parents. But the atmosphere that day was different. Father sat at the head of the table, hands clasped tightly. Mother avoided my gaze, and Luke quietly sipped his coffee. "Adrian," Father began, his voice low, "we need to talk about the future, about the family's assets." I nodded, my heart racing, though I didn't yet grasp what was coming. He continued, Your mother and I have thought long and hard. We want to protect what we've built, the house, the savings, everything. But with your situation, with the restaurant and the debt," he paused as if the words were heavy for him too. "We're not sure you can manage it well." I felt the blood rush to my face, not out of anger, but from a sharp, piercing pain. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was starting to guess. Mother spoke up, her voice trembling. "Adrian, sweetheart, we just want what's best. Luke has a stable job. He knows how to preserve things. If we divide the assets and your restaurant fails, then—" Father cut in, his voice firm this time, unwavering. "Your mother and I have decided. We won't be leaving the assets to you. The house, the savings, everything will go to Luke." I blinked as if I'd been slapped. He went on, "You're in debt. Your restaurant is a failing gamble. I can't let you squander what your mother and I spent our lives building on a dream that isn't real. When you have a more stable job, we'll reconsider." My chest tightened, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to scream, to tell them that the restaurant was my soul, that I would succeed. But the words caught in my throat. I looked at Luke, hoping he'd say something, but he stayed silent, his eyes fixed on the table. The pain welled up, not anger, but a deep sadness, like being rejected by the people I loved most. I took a deep breath, nodded, and said, my voice hoarse, "I understand. No arguments, no defenses." Because I knew words wouldn't change anything. That night I drove home, the bottle of wine still unopened in the trunk. The streets were foggy and I felt like I was drifting through a dream with no way out. I didn't blame my parents or Luke. They were just doing what they thought was right. But the pain lingered like a cut that didn't bleed but throbbed. I told myself I would prove them wrong, not out of revenge but to show them and to convince myself that I was strong enough to stand on my own. Outside, the air was bitterly cold, my breath forming clouds in the night. Their words, "We won't leave the assets to you. We don't believe you can do it," cut into my heart like daggers, but I didn't cry. I couldn't let myself be weak. I walked step by step toward the restaurant, the only place where I felt I belonged. In the darkness, the sign Adrian's Bistro glowed faintly under the streetlight, but to me it was a flame I had to keep burning. Inside, I turned on the lights and sat at the old wooden table in the corner. The warm golden light illuminated the walls I'd painted myself, the chairs I'd chosen one by one. This restaurant wasn't just a job. It was the dream I'd bet everything on, my savings, my time, my self-respect. My parents might not believe in me. Luke might not understand me, but I believed in myself. Or at least, I had to try to believe. The days that followed were a blur of relentless work. I woke up at 4 in the morning, went to the market for fresh ingredients, cooked all day, and stayed up past midnight crunching numbers. But the pressure didn't just come from the work. The bank sent debt notices like clockwork, one every week, harsh reminders that I was teetering on the edge. The red numbers in the ledger, the calls from creditors, the ping of emails on my phone. It was all a grim, unending symphony. On quiet evenings, when the restaurant had only a handful of customers, I stood behind the counter, staring at the empty tables, wondering if my parents were right, if I was chasing a meaningless dream. One winter night, with only a few $100s left in my account, a letter from the bank arrived, demanding $5,000 within 10 days, or they'd seize the restaurant. I sat in my tiny office, hands trembling, staring at the letter like it was a death sentence. I'd cut every expense, worked myself to exhaustion, but it still wasn't enough. In a moment of desperation, I picked up the phone and called my father. I didn't want to do it, but I had no choice. The phone rang and his voice came through as cold as ever. "Adrian, it's late. What's wrong?" "Dad," I said, my voice hoarse, "I'm in trouble. The bank, they're demanding $5,000. If I don't pay, they'll take the restaurant. I just need to borrow this amount. I'll pay you back, I swear." I paused, hoping for a shred of warmth, a flicker of trust. But he was silent, then replied, his voice hard as stone. "Adrian, I've told you before. Your restaurant is a mistake. Close it down. Get a stable job. I can't throw money at something that's about to collapse. My chest tightened like I was being suffocated. Dad, this is my dream, I whispered, but he cut me off. Dreams don't pay debts. Don't call about this again. He hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, tears welling up, not because of the debt, but because my father, the man I thought would always have my back, had turned away. That pain cut deeper than the debt notice, weighed heavier than the negative numbers in my books. But I wiped my tears, stood up, and told myself, if Dad doesn't believe in me, I'll save myself. The challenges piled up, but I didn't give up. I couldn't. If I fell, I'd prove them right. I started changing how I worked. I learned to manage costs, cutting expensive dishes that few ordered, negotiating with suppliers for better prices. I taught myself marketing, posting on social media, taking photos of dishes under warm lighting, writing short stories about the origins of each recipe, like the pumpkin soup inspired by my first autumn in college. Slowly, customers started coming. An elderly couple praised the braised beef. A small family snapped photos of the dessert I'd made. Those moments, however small, were the fuel that kept me going. But I didn't do it alone. Marcus, my best friend from high school, was the one who pulled me through the darkest days. Marcus wasn't a businessman, didn't know a thing about restaurants, but he had a big heart and a practical mind. One afternoon, as I sat in my office staring at a pile of bills, Marcus walked in, tossed a coffee on the desk, and said, "You look like you're about to die, Adrian. Spill it, how can I help?" I gave a weak smile, but he wouldn't let me brush it off. He sat down, forced me to tell him everything about the debt, the call with my father, the fear of losing the restaurant. Marcus didn't offer a magic solution, but he gave me what I needed most. He believed in me. He spent the whole weekend helping me build a business plan, analyzing costs, brainstorming ways to attract new customers. He connected me with a local food supplier, helping me lower ingredient costs while maintaining quality. He even stood on the street handing out flyers, wearing the apron I gave him, grinning ear to ear despite the drizzling rain. "If you fail, I fail," he said. And I knew he meant it. Marcus's support was a light in the tunnel. I scrambled to pay the $5,000 debt, borrowing a small amount from another friend and working extra night shifts to make up the rest. I started seeing results. A social media post about my special spaghetti dish went viral, drawing crowds to the restaurant over the weekend. A local food critic stopped by, writing a glowing review of my grilled salmon, calling it a story told through flavor. Customers increased, revenue grew, and for the first time in 2 years, I paid off the major debts. I stood in the kitchen watching my small team, 2 chefs, 3 waitstaff, work in sync, and felt a pride I'd never known. 2 years later, on a summer evening, I stood outside the restaurant watching a line of people waiting for a table. Adrian's Bistro was no longer a fragile dream. It was alive, real, and proof that I wasn't a failure. I paid off the debts, and more than that, I started dreaming bigger. I wanted to open a second restaurant, not just to prove something to my family, but to show myself I could go further. I called Marcus, sharing the idea. He laughed loudly over the phone. "You're crazy, but I love it. Go for it, Adrian, I'm right here." I hung up, looked up at the star-filled sky, and thought of my parents, of Luke, of that call with my father. They still hadn't called, hadn't visited. The pain was still there, but it no longer weighed me down. I'd found strength within myself, and though the road ahead was long, I knew I wasn't walking it alone. That night, I wrote a plan for the second restaurant on a piece of old paper, each line a promise to myself. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I wouldn't stop. Not for them, but for me. In the spring of the 3rd year, I stood before my new restaurant, Adrian's Haven, a name I chose to evoke a sense of peace, like a sanctuary amidst the storms of life. The wooden sign was hand-carved, the neon lights casting a soft glow on the word Haven, warm and inviting. Inside, tables were draped with white linen. Small vases of flowers adorned each one, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted from the kitchen. This was the milestone I'd dreamed of during long nights of calculations and exhausting days at the stove. The second restaurant wasn't just a step forward, it was a declaration. I had done it, despite everything. Preparing for the opening was a race against time. I worked tirelessly from curating the menu, the seared cod with passion fruit sauce as the highlight, to training the new team. Marcus, as always, was by my side, helping check the guest list, ensuring everything was perfect. "You're building an empire, Adrian," he said, clapping my shoulder, his eyes sparkling with pride. I smiled, but inside there was an emptiness. I wanted to share this moment with my family. I wanted my parents to see what I'd built, wanted Luke to understand that my dream wasn't a delusion. Summoning all my courage, I called to invite them. First, my mother. The phone rang for a while before she answered, her voice soft but distant. "Mom, I'm opening the new restaurant on Saturday," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I'd really love for you and Dad to come. It's important to me." She was silent for a moment, then replied, "I'll see, Adrian. But your father and I have been very busy lately." My heart sank, but I nodded, though she couldn't see. Then I called Luke. He picked up right away, but his voice was rushed like he was in the middle of a meeting. "Opening? Sounds great, bro," he said. "But I'm booked this weekend. Good luck, okay?" He hung up before I could say anything more. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like a child left behind at the playground. But I didn't let myself sink into sadness. I had work to do. The opening day arrived and the restaurant shone like a painting. Guests filled the space, from loyal patrons of Adrian's Bistro to new faces Marcus had invited. Laughter rang out, glasses clinked, and my team moved in harmony, delivering meticulously crafted dishes. A food journalist snapped photos asking me about the inspiration behind Haven. I answered, smiling, but my eyes kept drifting to the door, hoping for a familiar figure. They didn't come. Not my father, not my mother, not Luke. As the night wound down, I stood at the bar watching the restaurant empty out. Marcus approached, handing me a glass of wine. "You did it, Adrian. Look at this place. You're a star." I nodded, but my smile was forced. "They didn't come, Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse. He placed a hand on my shoulder, saying nothing. He understood. He always did. The disappointment sat like a heavy stone in my chest. I'd thought this success would change everything, that my parents would see I wasn't a failure, that Luke would look at me differently. But they didn't care. They had their own lives, their own beliefs, and I wasn't part of them. That night I returned to my small apartment, sat on the sofa and looked out the window. The city glowed brightly, but I felt lonelier than ever. The next morning I went back to the restaurant. I didn't let the pain hold me back. If my family wouldn't acknowledge me, I'd acknowledge myself. I dove into work, refining the menu, launching cooking workshops to attract new customers. Adrian's Haven quickly gained fame, featured in food magazines, becoming a favorite for those who loved refined cuisine. I used the profits to invest in a third restaurant, then a fourth. Each restaurant was a story, a piece of me, and I built them with all my heart. Marcus stayed by my side, helping manage the growing chain of restaurants. "You're not stopping, are you?" he asked one day as we sat in the new office, reviewing plans for the fifth restaurant. I smiled, this time genuinely. "No, Marcus, I'm not stopping." I wasn't doing this to prove anything to my family anymore. I was doing it because I wanted to, because I knew I could. But sometimes, in quiet moments, I thought of my parents, of Luke. I wondered how they were, if they'd heard about me in the news, if they felt even a flicker of pride. I wasn't angry at them, but I no longer waited for them. I'd learned to walk alone, and that path, though difficult, had led me to where I belonged. 3 years had passed since the opening of Adrian's Haven. I was no longer the man trembling before a debt notice or standing silently watching empty tables. Now I owned 5 restaurants, each one a piece of my soul. Adrian's Bistro remained the heart, but Haven and the 3 new additions, Ember, Lumen, and Harbor, had made me a name in the culinary world. The press called me the storyteller through food. Articles praised my braised beef and red wine. My cooking workshops were fully booked, and I had a knack for turning simple ingredients into unforgettable experiences. I provided jobs for dozens of people, from young chefs to waitstaff, and every day seeing the bustling crowds, I felt I was truly living. But success didn't erase the scars. I still remembered that Christmas night when my parents said they didn't believe in me, the distant look in Luke's eyes when I invited him to the opening. I no longer waited for their calls, no longer hoped they'd walk into my restaurant and say, "Adrian, you've done well." I had learned to live with that void, turning it into fuel. I invested in the community, offering free cooking classes for young chefs, donating food to charity kitchens. I was building a legacy, not to prove anything to them, but to prove it to myself. Then one day, everything changed. I was in the office at Lumen, reviewing plans for a sixth restaurant when my phone rang. It was my mother's number. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the screen. We hadn't spoken in 3 years, save for brief birthday texts. I took a deep breath and answered. "Adrian," her voice trembled, no longer the gentle tone I remembered. "Are you free? Your father and we want to see you." I heard something in her voice, desperation. "What's wrong, Mom?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Just come, please. At the house tonight." I agreed, though a sense of unease welled up inside me. I arrived at the old house, once a home, but now a place that stirred painful memories. The house was still beautiful, but something felt worn. Peeling paint, the flower garden my mother cherished now overgrown with weeds. I knocked and my mother opened the door, her eyes red, her hair grayer than I remembered. My father sat in the living room, his back hunched, no longer the confident man who once declared I wasn't trustworthy. Luke was there in a wrinkled shirt, no longer the polished figure he used to be. No one greeted me with a smile. "Adrian," my father began, his voice hoarse, "we're in trouble." He paused as if the words pained him. My mother continued, "Luke's company. It went bankrupt. He borrowed money to start a new venture, but it failed. We've used up all our savings, mortgaged the house. Now, we have nothing." Luke bowed his head, his hands clenched. I looked at him, my brother who was once the family's pride, now a shadow of himself. "We need your help," my mother said, her voice breaking. "You've succeeded, Adrian. You can save us." I sat there, silent, emotions surging like waves. Part of me wanted to shout, "Why now? Why, after you turned your backs on me, called my dream meaningless?" But another part, the part that still loved them, ached to see them like this. I thought of the nights I wrestled with debt, the days when no one in the family asked how I was. I thought of Adrian's bistro, of Marcus, of the customers who believed in me, and I realized I didn't owe them, but I also didn't want to be the one to turn away. "I'll help," I said, my voice calm though my heart raced. "But there's a condition." They looked at me, their eyes a mix of hope and skepticism. "Dad, Mom, Luke, I want you to work at my restaurants." Starting from the bottom, waitstaff, receptionist, kitchen assistant. "I want you to understand my work, to see its value. If you agree, I'll pay off the family's debts and save this house." Silence enveloped the room. Then my father shot up, his face flushed. "Waitstaff? Who do you think I am, Adrian? I worked my whole life to build this family, and you dare humiliate me?" My mother grabbed his hand, but she too looked at me with anger in her eyes. "You're ungrateful," she said, her voice trembling. "We raised you, and now you want us to do menial jobs?" Luke, speaking for the first time, growled, "Who do you think you are, Adrian? Just because you have a few restaurants, you think you're better than us?" I wasn't surprised, but their words still cut like knives. "I'm not trying to humiliate anyone," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I just want you to see what I've been through, what I've built. If you don't want to, I won't force you, but I won't give money if you don't change." My father pointed at the door. "Get out!" he shouted. "You're not my son." My mother cried, but didn't stop him. Luke turned away as if I didn't exist. I stood, walked to the door, and didn't look back. My father's words echoed in my mind, but I didn't let them drag me down. I drove back to Haven, stepped into the kitchen where the scent of herbs and the sizzle of pans welcomed me. I stood there in the space I'd created and felt an odd sense of peace. I had given them a chance, but they chose to refuse. That wasn't my fault. The next day I returned to work. I opened another restaurant, Beacon, and continued my community projects. I didn't think much about my family anymore. Not because I didn't love them, but because I had learned to love myself. I had overcome their rejections, the lonely nights, and now I knew I was strong enough to keep going no matter where the path led. The day my father pointed at the door and told me to get out, I thought it would be a wound that never healed. His words, "You're not my son," echoed in my mind like a mournful song, but they didn't destroy me. I had once feared losing my family, terrified that without them I'd be lost. But as I walked out that door, I realized something. I didn't need them to define me. I was Adrian Carter, the man who built 5 restaurants from nothing, who turned dreams into reality, and I wasn't going to stop. That same night, I returned to Adrian's Haven, standing in the kitchen where the scent of herbs and the sizzle of pans greeted me like an old friend. I picked up a knife, chopped onions, and let the tears fall, not from pain, but because I needed to release the emotions. I wasn't angry at my parents or Luke. I was sad, but that sadness was no longer a burden. It was part of me, like the scar on my hand from the time I burned a salmon dish in the early days of the restaurant. That scar reminded me I had fought, and I had won. In the months that followed, I threw myself into work with a renewed energy. I opened my 6th restaurant, Beacon, a warm space with red brick walls and a menu that told the story of my journey. From the pumpkin soup of my struggling days to the now famous braised beef in red wine. Beacon was more than a restaurant. It was a lighthouse guiding people like me, those who had been doubted but refused to give up. The press continued to write about me, calling me an inspiring entrepreneur. I appeared on a culinary TV show, standing before the cameras, sharing how I turned failure into motivation. I smiled, talked about Marcus, about the sleepless nights, but I didn't mention my family. Not because I hated them, but because my story was now my own. I invested more in the community. I launched a program to support young chefs, offering scholarships and practice space in my restaurants. I remembered the loneliness of starting out when no one believed in me, and I didn't want anyone else to feel that way. One afternoon, I stood in the kitchen of Bistro, teaching a young girl named Mia how to make beurre blanc sauce. She was clumsy, spilling the pan, but her eyes lit up when I said, "It's okay, try again. Keep going, you'll get it." Looking at Mia, I saw myself 10 years ago, full of ambition, full of fear, but unwilling to stop. Helping her, helping others like her, made me feel I was leaving a legacy bigger than my restaurants. I also expanded my charitable efforts. Once a month, Haven hosted a free dinner for the homeless, where I personally cooked simple but comforting dishes: potato soup, toasted bread, and hot tea. Those diners, with their tired but genuine smiles, reminded me that happiness wasn't in money or fame, but in moments of connection. Marcus, always by my side, would tease, "You're turning your restaurant into a community kitchen, Adrian." I'd laugh, "So what? This is my home and I want to share it." In quiet moments, I thought about my family. I didn't call them and they didn't reach out. I heard through the grapevine that Luke had moved away, taking odd jobs to get by. My parents sold the house and moved to a small apartment. I didn't know the details, and part of me didn't want to. Not because I was cold, but because I had learned to let go. I still loved them. That love would never fade, despite the pain they'd caused. But I no longer let that love bind me. I had forgiven them, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to be free. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I still remembered my mother's disappointed gaze at my empty restaurant, my father's voice saying I'd squander their legacy, the way Luke turned away when I needed him most. Those memories were part of me, but they didn't define me. They were lessons, teaching me that family isn't always the ones who support you most. Sometimes family is the ones you choose, like Marcus, who stood by me through every storm. like my restaurant team who believed in my dream, like the customers who made my work feel meaningful. One winter evening, I stood before my newest restaurant, Aurora, the golden lights illuminating the carved sign. The crowd was lively, laughter spilled through the windows, and the scent of baked apple pie filled the air. I wore a thin coat, my breath forming clouds, but my heart was warm. I looked into the restaurant, seeing Mia at the counter, confidently greeting guests. Marcus, now the chain's manager, checking the books, and the diners raising their glasses, sharing their stories. This was the world I'd built, not to prove anything to anyone, but to live true to myself. I pulled out my phone, opening an old photo, the family portrait above the fireplace where Luke and I were young, our parents smiling. I looked at it, feeling a faint pang, but no longer pain. I put the phone away, looked up at the star-filled sky. The city pulsed, vibrant and endless, and I knew I was part of it. I had overcome every challenge, not just to prove something to my family, but to affirm my own worth. I stepped into Aurora, blending into the crowd. A customer called out, complimenting the dessert. I smiled, thanked them, and returned to the kitchen. The knife in my hand moved lightly, rhythmically, like a song. I was no longer the man afraid of failure, afraid of rejection. I was Adrian, and I had found where I belonged.